By spring, you'll birth me 3 sons. Virgin Mountain. Man declared to the Amish obese woman, Naomi Yoder, you are a shame to this community. The words cracked through the small wooden house like a whip. Naomi knelt on the bare plank floor, knees aching, wrists tied tightly behind her back. Her head was bowed, white prayer cap trembling as she fought to steady her breathing. Around her, 5 elders in black coats and broad-brimmed hats stood in a half circle, their long beards and hard eyes turning the room into a courtroom without mercy. From the outside, Paradise Valley looked like heaven on earth. Simple houses, golden fields, horses pulling buggies along dirt roads, prayers at dawn, hymns at dusk, people in plain clothes living by plain rules. But for anyone who did not fit, it was a cage. Naomi, at 22, had spent her whole life learning that lesson. She was short and soft, her figure full beneath her dark blue dress. No matter how loose, she tied the apron strings. Her cheeks were round, usually flushed from work, her brown eyes warm and gentle when she dared to look up. Tonight, they were flooded with tears. Elder Jacob Miller, the oldest and harshest, glared down at her. You eat too much, you work too little, you are proud, you refuse 3 good marriage offers from respectable men. How dare you put yourself above God's will? Naomi's voice shook. They were all old enough to be my grandfathers, sir. 2 of them already had wives. They wanted a second woman to scrub their floors, to raise their children. They did not want a partner. I was afraid. Afraid? Elder Jacob's hand flew, striking her cheek so hard her head snapped to the side. Pain burned across her skin. A woman has no right to fear what her elders decide. You are unmarried at 22. Useless. A burden. Another elder, Ezra, stepped forward, his cold gaze traveling over her body. Look at her. No young man will take her. She is too heavy, too plain. We waste food on a mouth that gives us nothing in return. Naomi squeezed her eyes shut. She had heard these words whispered for years in the fields, in the kitchens, behind church walls. Fat, plain, unwanted. Hearing them spoken aloud by the men who ruled her world felt like being stripped naked in front of God himself. Outside, a buggy rolled past, iron wheels crunching on gravel. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. To anyone passing by, this little house was just another Amish home on another quiet evening. Inside, Naomi's life was being decided. Elder Samuel cleared his throat. We should cast her out, send her into the woods, let God judge if she lives or dies. Naomi's heart lurched. Exile meant starvation, wolves, winter. But Elder Jacob lifted a hand, eyes glinting. No, there is another way. I have heard of a mountain man on Thunder Ridge, 20 miles from here, Jeremiah Stone. He lives alone, like a wild beast. No wife, no children, no knowledge of proper ways. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. We send her to him. Naomi's breath caught. Please, no. If he accepts you, Jacob continued, ignoring her, you become his problem, not ours. If he does not, you will die on that mountain, and the community will be free of a burden. Either way, God's will is done. The other elders nodded. Naomi's world tilted. In one night, she had gone from invisible burden to disposable package, and tomorrow they would ship her into the arms of a stranger. Before we go on, where in the world are you listening from right now? Tell me in the comments, because as Naomi's story continues, you might just recognize pieces of your own heart in hers. Naomi stood by the wooden buggy, clutching her small cloth bag, the only possession she was allowed to take. 2 dresses, a worn shawl, a cracked Bible, no family heirlooms, no keepsakes, nothing that hinted she had once belonged anywhere. Elder Jacob climbed onto the driver's bench without looking at her. "Get in!" She obeyed, settling onto the cold back seat. The leather straps creaked as the horse began moving, pulling them away from Paradise Valley, the only home she had ever known, even if it had never loved her. No one came to say goodbye. Not a single face watched her leave. She was already dead to them. The buggy rolled past familiar sights, barns she had scrubbed, fields she had harvested, houses whose doors she had never been welcomed through, and Naomi kept her gaze lowered. Every corner held a memory of humiliation. Every road had carried whispers behind her back. Too big for her age. Waste of good food. No man will take that girl. Even the children had learned to jeer. Today, she would rather face wolves. After 2 hours, the road narrowed into a path of dirt and rock, winding toward the distant shadow of Thunder Ridge. The mountain rose like a giant in the horizon, rugged, steep, crowned with dark evergreens and a chilling sense of isolation. Naomi hugged herself tighter. Elder Jacob hadn't spoken a word since leaving the village until suddenly he jerked the reins and stopped at the foot of the mountain. "This is where you get out." Naomi blinked, confused. We aren't all the way there yet." He pointed at the steep incline. "Jeremiah Stone's cabin is 3 hours up that path. I will not waste daylight escorting you. If you are meant to reach him, you will. If not," he shrugged, "that is God's will." He tossed her bag onto the ground. Dust rose. Naomi scrambled to pick it up, breath trembling. "You can't leave me here. I don't know the trail." "Follow the path." "It is not complicated," he said coldly. "But it's nearly evening. I could fall. I could—" "That is not my concern." And with that, he flicked the reins. The horse lurched forward. The buggy rolled away. Elder Jacob didn't look back once. Naomi stood alone, the wind biting at her skin, her bag heavy in her hands. Her voice cracked as she whispered to the empty woods, "Please, please don't leave me here." But no sound answered except the caw of a raven. She wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve and began climbing. The trail was narrow, covered in slippery pine needles and hidden stones. Branches snagged her dress. Roots twisted beneath her feet. After the first mile, her legs burned. After the second, her breath came in painful gasps. She wasn't built for mountain climbing. Her community had mocked her for being too soft, never knowing she had spent her childhood hungry more often than full. Halfway up, her shoe tore. A jagged rock scraped her ankle. Blood soaked through her sock. Naomi cried out, stumbling to her knees. She wanted to give up. She wanted to curl into the earth and disappear. But she remembered Elder Jacob's words. "If he does not accept you, you will die on that mountain." Naomi wasn't ready to die, so she stood again, shaking, limping, but determined. The sky darkened into lavender, then deep blue. Stars emerged above the treetops. The temperature dropped, a sharp warning that night on the mountain was not forgiven. Just when her body was ready to collapse for the last time, she saw it, a faint orange glow flickering between the pines. A cabin, a real cabin, warm light bleeding through the cracks in the windows like a promise. Her heart leapt painfully. She forced herself forward, one step, another, her breath fogged in the cold air. Her fingers numbed, her legs trembled uncontrollably. Finally, she reached the front porch and clung to the railing so she wouldn't fall. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles met the wood, the door swung open. A towering silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by firelight. Jeremiah Stone, tall as the doorway itself, broad shoulders outlined beneath a wool shirt stretched tight across muscle, wild brown hair brushing his shoulders, a thick beard framing a face carved with solitude, and those eyes, blue as glacial ice, fixed on her with stunned confusion. Naomi froze. Jeremiah stared. Two people who had spent their entire lives lonely, unwanted, unseen, simply looked at one another as if the world had stopped. Her voice finally broke the silence, barely above a whisper. I was sent here. Please don't turn me away." Jeremiah stepped forward, concern overtaking shock. "Good Lord," he murmured, "you look half dead." He reached out, steadying her before she collapsed. "Come inside," he said softly. "You're safe now." And for the first time in her life, Naomi believed someone meant those words. Jeremiah did not pick her up like a man saving a maiden. He gathered her into his arms like someone touching a miracle he'd never expected to receive. Naomi's knees finally gave out the moment she crossed the threshold, and Jeremiah caught her easily, his arms strong, warm, trembling just slightly, as if her weight didn't burden him, only startled him. "Sit, right here." His voice was deep, gentle, unfamiliar with speaking to anyone. He lowered her carefully onto a chair near the fire. The cabin glowed with amber light, shadows dancing across thick log walls. It smelled of cedar, smoke, and something like rosemary. Naomi inhaled shakily, the first breath that didn't carry fear since dawn. Jeremiah crouched in front of her, studying her face as if he wasn't sure she was real. "You walked up here alone?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded. "From Paradise Valley." His brows drew together. "That's 20 miles, and the climb alone is enough to break a healthy man." "I wasn't given a choice," Naomi said softly. "They left me." Anger flashed in his blue eyes, quick, fierce, but then softened with concern. "Are you hurt?" "I'm just tired and cold." Jeremiah rose abruptly and rushed to the back of the cabin. When he returned, his arms were full. A wool blanket, a cup of steaming peppermint tea, a towel to wipe her bleeding ankle. He draped the blanket around her shoulders. Naomi flinched, not because it hurt, but because no one had ever covered her with anything except shame. Jeremiah froze. "Did I hurt you?" "No," Naomi whispered, clutching the blanket. "You're being very kind." He exhaled, visibly relieved, and knelt to tend her ankle. When his large, calloused hands brushed her skin, Naomi's breath caught, not out of fear, but out of something gentler, something new. Jeremiah didn't notice. He was too focused on her wound. "Your shoes ruined," he murmured. "Your foot's bleeding. Why didn't they at least give you proper boots?" Naomi gave a small, bitter laugh. "Because they didn't care if I made it." Jeremiah's jaw clenched. He dipped the cloth in warm water and cleaned the cut with surprising tenderness for a man who looked like he could break granite with his bare hands. "I'll give you a pair of mine. We'll stuff them with wool so they fit. You don't have to." "Yes," Jeremiah said simply, almost stubbornly. "I do." Naomi swallowed hard. She didn't know what to do with a man who offered care without cruelty. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls. Inside, Jeremiah finished bandaging her ankle, then sat back on his heels. "My name is Jeremiah Stone," he said shyly. "I suppose you already knew that." She nodded. "Naomi Yoder." His gaze softened. "Naomi," he repeated, as if carving it into memory. Silence settled, warm, fragile. Then Jeremiah stood abruptly, rubbing the back of his neck like a boy frightened on his first day in church. "There's food," he offered, "if you're hungry, and you must be after all that." Naomi hadn't eaten in almost a day, but she hesitated. "I don't want to trouble you." Jeremiah blinked. "Trouble me? You're my guest." Guest. No one had ever called her that. He hurried to the hearth, ladling thick venison stew into a wooden bowl. His hands fumbled slightly, as if nervous, and a small smile tugged at Naomi's lips. He brought the bowl to her with both hands, as if presenting something precious. "Here," he murmured, "eat." She tasted the stew slowly, warm, hearty, rich. The flavors wrapped around her like the blanket across her shoulders. "It's wonderful," she whispered. Jeremiah brightened like a lantern lit from within. "You really think so?" She nodded. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted, embarrassed. "I only know a few things." "It's perfect," she said. He exhaled, relieved, and somehow proud. When she finished, Jeremiah sat across from her, hands clasped between his knees, staring at her in a way that made her cheeks warm. "What is it?" she asked softly. He shook his head, flustered. "Nothing. I've never seen a woman before." Naomi blinked. "Ever?" He nodded, face reddening beneath his beard. "When I was 22, I came up here to live alone. The world wasn't for me. I haven't seen a woman since, not even from a distance." Her heart fluttered. He wasn't just untouched. He was untouched by the world. "I don't know what to say to you," Jeremiah confessed quietly. "I don't know how to behave. I don't know how to be a husband. But when you knocked on my door, something in me woke up." The firelight flickered across his features, vulnerability etched into a face built for storms. Naomi didn't know courage lived inside her until she spoke the next words. "You don't have to know everything," she whispered. "We can learn together." Jeremiah swallowed hard. For a moment he looked like a man hearing the gospel for the first time. Very gently he asked, "Naomi, do you want to stay?" Her breath trembled. Her heart didn't. "Yes," she whispered, "I do." And Jeremiah Stone, untouched mountain man, exhaled like a man who had just found the missing half of his soul. The cabin looked different in daylight. Naomi woke to the warm orange glow of dawn slipping through the window, painting soft stripes across the wooden walls. For a moment she forgot where she was. She forgot the elders, the accusations, the mountain. She only felt warmth, smelled firewood and pine, heard the steady quiet of wilderness. Then she turned her head and remembered. Jeremiah Stone was asleep on the floor beside the bed. He had refused to sleep in the bed with her, not out of disgust, not out of judgment, but because, in his own shy words, a husband should protect his wife, not make her nervous. He had wrapped himself in a thin blanket and slept on the rug, close enough to hear her breathing, far enough not to cross any line she didn't understand yet. Naomi felt something inside her soften. No man in her community had ever shown her such respect. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake him. But Jeremiah stirred, blinking awake with the disorientation of a man unused to sharing space with another human. "Oh, good morning," he said, voice rough from sleep. "Good morning," Naomi whispered. He pushed himself up, running a hand through his wild brown hair. He looked large and rumpled and endearingly uncertain. "Did you sleep well? Was the bed warm enough?" Yes, thank you. She hesitated, then added, because you kept the fire going all night. Jeremiah glanced away, embarrassed. I didn't want you getting cold. Storm winds can sneak through the cracks. He had stayed awake half the night, feeding the fire so she could sleep. Naomi's throat tightened. Jeremiah, no one has ever taken care of me like that. He looked at her, puzzled. Why wouldn't they? You deserve care. She opened her mouth to tell him all the reasons she believed otherwise, but decided not to. Not today. Not when this cabin felt like the first safe place she'd ever known. Instead, she said softly, thank you. Jeremiah busied himself making breakfast, scrambled eggs, toasted bread, bacon fried in a cast-iron pan. He moved with a mixture of confidence and awkwardness, like a man good with his hands, but unfamiliar with being watched. When he set a plate before her, he said, eat as much as you want. I can make more. Naomi hesitated, the old shame tightening in her stomach. Back in Paradise Valley, she had learned to take the smallest portion possible, to avoid comments, stares, whispered cruelty. Jeremiah noticed her pause. You don't like bacon? He asked gently. No, I do. Her hands trembled slightly. Jeremiah sat across from her, leaning forward. Naomi, you don't have to hide how hungry you are. Not here, not with me. Her eyes stung. He didn't say it like a command. He said it like a vow. She ate. Slowly at first, then with growing comfort. Jeremiah watched her with quiet happiness, as if seeing her nourished was a gift. After breakfast, he stood. Let me show you the cabin. The living area was spacious, with a heavy wooden table Jeremiah had carved himself. Animal pelts lined the floor. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, crackling with warmth. 3 doors led to other rooms, the bedroom, a pantry, and a workroom filled with tools. This place is yours now, he said simply. Ours, if you want it to be. Naomi traced her fingers along the table, noticing every careful carving. You built this? I built the whole cabin, Jeremiah admitted quietly. My hands know wood better than people. His shyness was endearing. Naomi found herself smiling, something she hadn't done freely in years. He showed her the garden next. Winter frost still rimmed the edges, but beneath linen covers lay rows of herbs and winter greens. I try to grow enough to last through storms, he explained, and I hunt when I need meat. But if you'd like, we could plant more in spring. Anything you want. You'd let me choose? Naomi asked, surprised. He nodded. This is our home. Shouldn't you have a say? Her chest ached with gratitude. No one had ever asked what she wanted before. Inside again, Jeremiah lit lanterns while Naomi swept the floors, a familiar task, but different now. No one barked orders. No one watched for mistakes. No one sneered at her body as she bent, reached, worked. Jeremiah passed by her, carrying chopped wood. Careful with your ankle, he murmured. Don't strain it. She smiled. Yes, Jeremiah. By noon, the two worked side by side with surprising ease. Their silence was comfortable, their movements natural. Naomi found herself humming softly, an old Amish hymn she hadn't sung in years. Jeremiah listened, captivated. You have a pretty voice, he murmured. Her cheeks flushed. No one ever said that before. They should have. Naomi's heart fluttered. Later, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting golden light through the cabin, they sat by the fire with steaming bowls of stew. Jeremiah stared at the flames, jaw tight, as if wrestling with something inside him. Finally, he looked at her. Naomi, he began, voice low, Last night, when you said you wanted to stay, you meant it, didn't you?" "Yes," she whispered. He exhaled, relieved. "Good, because I want you here, not because they sent you, not because you had nowhere else to go." His hand trembled slightly on his knee. "I want you because you make this cabin feel alive. You make me feel like I'm not just surviving the days anymore." Naomi's breath caught. Jeremiah smiled shyly. "I don't know much about courting or marriage, but I know what I feel when I look at you." "What do you feel?" she asked softly. Jeremiah swallowed. His eyes held hers with the raw honesty of a man who had never learned how to lie. "Hope," he whispered. She felt her entire world tilt gently toward him. Then, with a seriousness that made her pulse flutter, Jeremiah reached across the small table and took her hand, his palm rough, hers soft. "Naomi," he said, voice steady and filled with quiet conviction, "I want a family, I want children, and I want them with you. When spring comes, I pray we'll have the start of the life we longed for." She froze, heart pounding. He continued, earnest and innocent. "If God wills it by spring, you'll be carrying the first of our children, a son, maybe 3 sons if we're blessed." Naomi's lips parted in surprise. Jeremiah flushed, but didn't look away. "I've waited a long time for a family, and I believe, with every part of me, that you're meant to be its beginning." Her breath trembled. Her pulse quickened. She had never been wanted, never been chosen, never been dreamed of. And here was a man who looked at her as though she were a gift heaven had dropped at his door. Slowly, tears filled her eyes. "Jeremiah," she whispered, "no one has ever looked at me the way you do." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then they've been blind." A soft, stunned laugh broke from her lips. He smiled, and in the glow of the firelight, Naomi Yoder realized that, for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the future. She wanted to step into it with him. Winter deepened around the cabin, sealing the world in white silence. Jeremiah and Naomi slipped into a rhythm that felt almost like a dance, quiet, natural, full of unspoken understanding. They cooked together, worked together, sat close by the fire every night, learning small truths about each other the way one learns a hymn, softly, reverently, with wonder. But no life, no matter how gentle, remains untouched by the past. The first crack appeared one quiet evening, after Naomi had finished mending one of Jeremiah's shirts. She handed it to him with a shy smile. He slipped it over his broad shoulders, testing the fit. "It feels better than when I bought it," he said. "Thank you, Naomi." "You're welcome." She hesitated. "It's nothing special, just a simple repair." Jeremiah stepped closer. "It's special to me." Her cheeks warmed, but something in her eyes dimmed. Subtle, almost invisible, yet Jeremiah noticed. He always noticed her now. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. Naomi shook her head. "Nothing." But Jeremiah didn't look away. He wasn't a man used to lies or used to accepting them. "Naomi." Her breath hitched. She sat slowly on the edge of the bed, clutching her apron with trembling fingers. "It's just, every time I do something useful, I wait for someone to tell me it's not good enough, that I ruined it, that I'm too slow or too clumsy." She forced a laugh, but it cracked at the edges. "Old habits, I suppose." The words felt small, but the pain beneath them was enormous. Jeremiah's heart clenched. He sat beside her, carefully, leaving gentle space, not crowding her. "Did they tell you those things in Paradise Valley?" he asked quietly. She nodded, eyes downcast. "All the time." "Your elders?" Everyone. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. A muscle ticked near his temple. They were wrong. Naomi tried to shrug it off. It's just how things are there. No. His voice dropped, low and sure. How things were. You're not there anymore. She swallowed hard, tears threatening. It's difficult to forget. Jeremiah reached out, pausing just inches from her cheek, silently asking permission. When she nodded faintly, he brushed away a tear with the softest touch. You don't have to forget, he murmured. You only have to remember who you are now. She leaned into his palm, breath trembling. And who am I now? She whispered. Jeremiah's cheeks reddened, but he held her gaze. My Naomi. Her breath caught, his touch lingered, and then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his hand. Because he wanted nothing from her, she did not freely give. The tenderness in that small restraint made her chest ache, but tenderness could not erase fear completely. Later that week, while Jeremiah chopped firewood outside, Naomi was kneading dough in the kitchen when a strange noise drifted from the woods, something heavy snapping through underbrush. She froze, fingers sinking into the soft dough. The sound came again, louder. Wolves? A bear? A stranger? Her heart pounded. She rushed to the window, and relief crashed through her when she saw Jeremiah emerging from the tree line, axe slung over his shoulder. Snow clung to his beard, and his cheeks were flushed from the cold. He looked like a man carved from the very mountain. But then she saw it. Behind him, at the far edge of the trees, 2 dark figures on horseback. Her breath stopped. She dropped the dough. Flour dusted the floor like snow as she stumbled out the door. Jeremiah! He turned quickly at the panic in her voice. Naomi? What's wrong? She pointed toward the woods, but the riders were already gone, as if they'd vanished into the branches. Jeremiah strode forward, scanning the tree line. Who was it? Did you see their faces? No, Naomi whispered, trembling. But their clothes, their hats, they looked like someone from Paradise Valley. Jeremiah's eyes hardened. The elders. Naomi buried her face in her hands. I knew they wouldn't just let me go. They'll come for me, Jeremiah. They'll force me to return. Over my body, he said instantly, and meant it. Naomi flinched. Jeremiah, if they take me back, they'll punish me for leaving. They'll punish me for being here with you. The thought twisted her stomach in fear. But Jeremiah stepped closer and lifted her chin gently so she had to meet his gaze. You're not property, he said, voice steady with conviction deep enough to shake the earth. They don't own you. That's not how they see it, she whispered. He reached to take her trembling hands in his. Naomi, they cannot take what already belongs here. He touched her chest lightly, reverently, above her heart. With me? Her tears fell. I don't want to lose this, she whispered. I don't want to lose you. You won't, he promised. But promises could not stop what came next. 3 days later, near dusk, Naomi was setting 2 bowls of stew on the table when hoofbeats thundered outside, dozens of them, shaking the very ground. Jeremiah stood from his chair so fast it scraped across the floor. His hand flew to the hunting rifle mounted by the door. Naomi's spoon clattered to the ground. No one rode in Paradise Valley unless they meant to control, punish, reclaim. The riders stopped outside the cabin. Voices echoed, low, angry, authoritative. Then a fist pounded on the door. Jeremiah Stone, by order of Paradise Valley, we've come for the woman you are harboring. Naomi's blood drained from her face. Jeremiah's entire body shifted, still gentle, still good, but suddenly steel beneath the surface. He stepped between Naomi and the door, positioning himself like a living shield. "No one," he said quietly, eyes blazing with the promise of a storm, "is taking my wife." The pounding on the cabin door shook the walls, rattling the lanterns hanging from the beams above. Outside, boots crunched in the snow, horses snorted angry clouds of steam, and men barked orders to one another. It sounded like an army. Naomi's breath came too fast. She backed up until her shoulders hit the kitchen wall, hands trembling against her apron. Jeremiah didn't move. He stood, planted between her and the door, his body blocking her completely, a wall of muscle and resolve. His jaw clenched hard enough to crack stone. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Naomi nodded, though fear clawed up her throat. Another thunderous knock. "Jeremiah Stone!" The voice outside was deep, aged, rough with authority. She had feared her whole life. "Open this door. You are harboring a woman who belongs to Paradise Valley." Jeremiah's brows lowered. "Belongs?" he repeated under his breath, voice cold. "No woman belongs to them." He stepped forward and unlatched the door. The moment it swung open, cold wind and torchlight flooded inside. 6 Amish elders stood in front of the cabin, Jacob Miller leading them. Behind him, nearly 20 men from the community held lanterns and wooden staffs, their faces hard and righteous. Naomi shrank instinctively, even though they couldn't see her behind Jeremiah. "Truong Long," Jacob sneered. "You've taken what is ours." Jeremiah didn't flinch. "Naomi is not yours." "She is a defiant woman," Jacob snapped. "She refused marriage to men of standing. She disrupts order. Paradise Valley has cast her out. She will be escorted back for discipline." Naomi felt her lungs collapse. Jeremiah stepped fully outside, shutting the door halfway behind him so she was hidden, though she could still hear every word. "Discipline," his voice rumbled. "You mean punishment." "It is the will of our community," Jacob declared. "She broke our laws." Jeremiah leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Your laws starved her, beat her, humiliated her. And when she survived all of that, you tried to throw her away." Jacob stiffened. "She is marked by sin." "She is marked by bruises," Jeremiah growled. A murmur rippled through the men behind Jacob. Jacob scowled. "She will come with us. Move aside." Jeremiah didn't. He planted his boots in the snow, tall as a tree, unmoving as a mountain. "No." Jacob's face twisted. "You have no authority over her. I'm her husband." The words thundered into the night, bold and unshakable. Gasps rose among the gathered men. Jacob's voice cracked. "Impossible." Jeremiah continued. "She chose to stay. Whether you believe it or not, she is free here, and I will protect her with my life." The men behind Jacob shifted uneasily. Some looked at their feet. Others looked toward the cabin windows, glowing warm in the darkness, as though suddenly realizing the cruelty of what they had done. But Jacob was not a man who backed down. "You think you can defy the will of our people?" he spat. "I defy anyone who lays a hand on her," Jeremiah said. Jacob raised his staff. "If she does not come willingly, we will drag her out." Naomi heard it. The words sliced through her fear and hit something deeper, something that had slowly grown since she first stepped inside the warm cabin, something Jeremiah had watered with kindness, patience, love. For the first time in her life, Naomi stepped toward danger instead of away. She moved past Jeremiah before he could stop her and stood in the doorway, trembling but upright. "Naomi, no!" Jeremiah reached for her. She shook her head gently. "It's my turn." The elder's eyes widened. Naomi lifted her chin, voice shaking yet clear. "I will not go back with you." Jacob's nostrils flared. "You do not get to choose." "Yes," she cut him off. Quiet, but firm. A voice discovered after a lifetime of being silenced. "I do." Jeremiah's hand slowly found hers, lacing their fingers together. Naomi continued, "You called me a burden, a disgrace, a woman no one would ever want. You told me I was worthless, but you were wrong." She turned slightly toward Jeremiah, her voice breaking. "I am loved here. I am safe." Then she faced Jacob again. "And I will never return to Paradise Valley." For a moment, no one breathed. Jacob raised his staff, but the men behind him hesitated. Two lowered their lanterns. Another murmured something uncertain. They were beginning to see the truth. Jeremiah stepped forward, placing himself fully between Naomi and the elders once more. "This conversation is over." Jacob swallowed rage, but he couldn't fight 20 years of mountain muscle and a woman finally willing to speak her truth. With a furious sweep of his coat, he turned his horse and barked, "Paradise Valley will remember this betrayal." The riders retreated into the forest, torches shrinking until they vanished in the dark. Silence returned. Naomi's knees buckled, but Jeremiah caught her instantly, lifting her against his chest. "You were brave," he whispered into her hair, "braver than anyone I've ever seen." Naomi sobbed softly. "I thought they would take me." "Never," Jeremiah murmured, holding her tighter. "Not while I'm alive." The woods fell silent after the riders disappeared. No hoofbeats, no torches, no voices demanding obedience. Only wind brushing through the pines and the slow, steady beat of Jeremiah's heart against Naomi's ear. He carried her inside without a word, his arms strong and protective, as if afraid she might slip away now that the danger had passed. Naomi held on to him, fingers twisting into the fabric of his shirt, absorbing the warmth of him, the steadiness, the safety she had never known before. He set her gently onto the chair near the fire, but he didn't step away. His hands rested on her shoulders, grounding her, thumbs stroking quietly along her collarbone where her breath still trembled. "You shouldn't have come outside," he murmured. "I had to," she whispered. "I've spent my whole life being silent and hiding. If I stayed behind the door tonight, I'd still belong to them." Jeremiah knelt in front of her, the firelight brushing his face with gold. "You don't belong to anyone," he said softly. "Not to them, not even to me." Naomi blinked, confused. "But you said—" He took her hands, folding them carefully between his own. "I said I'm your husband," he admitted. "I meant it, but marriage isn't ownership. It's choosing every day, and I'll never keep you somewhere you don't want to be." Her throat tightened. "I want to be here." He inhaled slowly, eyes closing for a moment, as if those words eased a wound he'd carried a long time. "Then this is your home," he said, "if you'll have it." Naomi looked around the cabin, the soft glow of the embers, the bed they shared, the stew cooling on the table, the coat he always hung for her by the door, the pieces of her slowly stitched into the spaces of his life. Her gaze returned to him. "This already feels like home," she whispered. His breath shook. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet, and wrapped his arms around her, slowly, carefully, reverently, as if she were something holy. Naomi melted into him, her forehead against his chest, her body finally releasing the tension she'd carried up the mountain. "I thought they would take you from me," Jeremiah murmured. "I've never been afraid like that." Naomi tilted her face upward. You stood between me and them. No one has ever stood for me. He cupped her cheek. Then let this be the first of many times. She leaned into his touch, feeling that strange, peaceful warmth settle deep inside her ribs. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and gentle. Inside, Jeremiah led her to sit beside him on the bed, the fire casting long shadows around them. He brushed a curl loose from her bonnet and tucked it behind her ear. Naomi, he said quietly, they'll come again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but someday. They won't let you go easily. I know. Her voice trembled but didn't break. But I'm not alone anymore. Jeremiah's thumb brushed her knuckles. No, you're not. For a long, warm moment, they sat together in silence. Two people who had been thrown away by the world, now finding something soft, something whole in each other. Naomi rested her head on his shoulder. Jeremiah kissed her temple, shy but certain. The fire crackled. The storm outside softened. And somewhere between fear and hope, pain and healing, the two of them found a fragile, beautiful truth. Whatever battles waited beyond their door, whatever storms might rise in the valley below, they would face them together, because she was no longer the Amish girl no one wanted, and he was no longer the untouched man living in the quiet of the mountain. They were something new, something shared, something strong enough to begin again. Stories like this remind us that even in the harshest places, even in the loneliest lives, love finds a way to bloom. Every time I read your comments, I'm reminded how far these tales travel. Across towns, across countries, across quiet rooms where someone needs to hear that they too deserve gentleness. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from today? Your voice matters here. And if you still believe that love can rise from the coldest winters, stay close. The next story is already waiting for you. He hired the obese virgin to satisfy his appetite. What happened in his kitchen? Go on, McKenna, pick your cook, the hotel keeper drawled, loud enough for the whole dining room to hear. We've got widows, war brides, or, if you're really hungry, you can take the fat virgin in the corner. She looks like she could satisfy any appetite. The minute the tables roared with laughter, coffee cups rattled, spurs clinked, and someone slapped the bar so hard the whiskey sloshed over the rim. Only one person didn't laugh. She sat near the kitchen door, hands knotted in her lap, cheeks burning. Eleanor Nell Parker, 28 years old, 5'4", and built like the baker's cart she used to push back in Chicago. Her bodice pulled tight over her round belly, her arms were soft and heavy, and her double chin trembled when she bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. Nell had sewn her best blue dress for this day, had braided her dark hair smooth and neat, had even pricked her fingers raw, ironing the white apron she wore. She'd come west because the advertisement in the newspaper said one thing she knew how to do better than anything else in the world. Wanted, cook, must know hearty homestead meals. It had not mentioned being paraded like livestock. Never been married either, the hotel keeper added with a nasty grin, resting his meaty hands on Nell's shoulders as if she were a side of beef on display. Church-going, quiet as a mouse, still pure as Sunday snow. Eats like a team of horses, but I reckon a mountain man like you could afford to keep her. A ranch hand whistled. You sure she's just a cook and not the whole larder? More laughter. Someone mooed like a cow. Nell stared at a knot in the floorboards until it blurred, her throat tight. Her fingers dug into the coarse fabric of her skirt. She had crossed 1,000 miles by train, then by stage, clutching a worn cookbook and a letter of recommendation like talismans. She had told herself that out here in Montana, people cared more about hot meals than narrow waists. Now, every cruel word she had ever heard back home, too big, too slow, too much, seemed to echo off the timbered ceiling. "Come on, McKenna," the hotel keeper pressed. "You wanted a cook for that mountain cabin of yours. Take your pick. You can have any woman in this room, or you can have the fat one." Silence fell for a heartbeat. The men turned to look at the stranger in the doorway. He filled it, broad-shouldered, bearded, coat dusted with trail dirt and pine needles. Elias Bear McKenna stepped fully into the room, blue eyes cutting through the haze of pipe smoke. He glanced once at the row of women the hotel had lined up like dishes on a sideboard. Then his gaze settled on Nell, still shrinking in her chair. The faintest muscle moved in his jaw. "I'll take her," the mountain man said, voice low and steady. The fat one. The room froze. Forks hovered midair. Conversations died on open lips. Even the hotel keeper blinked, taken off guard. Elias McKenna didn't look at any of them. He walked straight toward Nell, boots thudding against the wood floor, every step radiating a quiet, dangerous certainty, the kind that made even the drunkest cowhand instinctively move aside. Nell's breath caught. She lifted her chin an inch, just enough to look at him. He was taller than she'd expected, at least 6'3", with arms thick from years of chopping timber and hauling supplies up mountain trails. His beard was trimmed shorter than most frontiersmen, shot with early silver. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, the kind that came from claws, not a knife. But the most startling thing was the way he looked at her, not with hunger, not with mockery, not with pity. He looked at her as if she were a person. Nell swallowed. "Sir, I didn't agree to be part of whatever this was." Elias nodded once. "I know," the hotel keeper snorted. "Well, McKenna, if you want her, you can take her. No charge. She ain't hired by the hotel." The man leaned in close, voice oily. "You sure you don't want to look over the slimmer ones? That one'll break your horse's legs before you even get out of town." A few men laughed again, though more nervously this time. Elias didn't even turn his head. He simply rested a hand on the back of Nell's chair. "Miss, is this work you still want?" No one had ever asked her like that. Not "can you?" Not "will you?" But "want." Her throat tightened. She had spent years cooking in boarding houses, factories, and settlement kitchens, feeding 10 men of 50, making miracles out of cheap flour and scraps. It was the one thing she had pride in, until that pride had been yanked from her minutes earlier, and now this man was giving it back, without a speech, without bravado. Just a question. "I do want it," she whispered. If you mean actual cooking, not the rest." "I meant cooking," he said simply. The hotel keeper threw up his hands. "Suit yourself. She'll eat a month's wages in a week." Elias ignored him entirely. He offered his hand to Nell. "My cabin is 4 hours into the mountains. Weather gets rough afternoon. If you're still willing, we should leave now." Nell looked around the room one last time, at the men who had laughed, at the women who had looked away in embarrassment, at the hotel keeper who had grabbed her shoulders as if she were an object. Then she placed her hand in Elias's. His grip was warm, steady, unexpectedly gentle. He helped her stand, then took her carpet-bag from beside her chair. It was heavy, filled with her precious tins of nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, a bundle of knives wrapped in linen, 3 aprons she'd embroidered, and her worn copy of American Home Cookery. He lifted it as if it weighed nothing. "Do you have other belongings?" he asked. "One trunk in my room upstairs." "We'll get it." As they walked toward the stairwell, whispers followed them. "She'll never make it up the mountain." He must be desperate. Poor man, doesn't know what he's taking on. Nell heard every word. Each one felt like a pin pressed into her heart. Elias stopped halfway across the room. He didn't turn around, didn't even raise his voice. But the low rumble of his words carried. "She is not cattle. She is not a joke. Next man who speaks about her like that will answer to me." Silence swallowed the room whole. Nell stared at his back, stunned. No one, not her employer in Chicago, not the men she'd cooked for in Denver, not even her own cousins, had ever defended her like that. Upstairs, Elias waited while she opened her trunk and checked her things. He didn't rummage, didn't hurry her, just stood near the door like a silent sentinel. When she nodded that she was ready, he lifted the trunk onto his shoulder with one fluid motion. Outside, the Montana sun struck them like a blessing. Warm wind lifted Nell's hair. The scent of pine, dust, and horses filled her lungs. Elias secured her trunk onto the pack mule, then tied her carpet-bag behind his saddle. When he helped her onto the mare, his hands were respectful, firm, but never lingering. "Ready?" he asked. Nell nodded. "Yes." Elias mounted his horse, clicked his tongue, and the small caravan began moving north toward the jagged blue mountains rising like teeth against the horizon. As the town faded behind them, Nell let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time in years, the shame didn't crush her. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her without mocking her. She didn't know whether to be afraid of the unknown or hopeful for the first time. The trail out of Silverbrook began as a dusty road edged with sagebrush and scattered pines. Before long, it gave way to narrower paths carved by deer and trappers, weaving upward into the rising bones of the Montana frontier. The wind cooled as they climbed, brushing Nell's cheeks like a whispered welcome. Elias rode in front, broad shoulders steady as stone, guiding both horses and the mule with sure movements. He didn't talk much, barely at all, but there was something comforting in the silence. It didn't feel expectant or impatient, just calm, like a wide, still lake. Nell kept her hands on the saddle horn, worried the mare would falter under her weight, but the animal stepped carefully, unbothered. Elias had chosen her for a reason, strong, patient, and unflinching on steep ground. Every time the path angled sharply or the rocks grew loose, he slowed the pace without looking back, as if he could feel her struggle through the air. 2 hours into the climb, the forest thickened around them. Tall lodgepole pines cast long shadows. The air smelled of sap and earth. A hawk circled above, letting out a cry that echoed through the valley. Nell's thighs ached, her palms damp from gripping the saddle. She told herself to endure it. She had endured much worse. But Elias finally called out, "We'll stop here a while." He steered them toward a clearing protected by boulders and a fallen tree. Dismounting, he stepped to Nell's side before she could even attempt to swing her leg over. "I can—" she began. "I know," he said quietly, and offered his hands. She allowed him to guide her down. Her boots hit the earth, and her knees buckled from riding tension. Elias steadied her elbows, neither awkward nor intrusive, then stepped back once he was sure she wouldn't fall. "You all right?" "Yes, thank you." He nodded, then pulled a small bundle from his saddlebag. Bread, smoked venison, apple slices wrapped in cloth, all neatly prepared. "This isn't much," he said, handing her the food. "It's what I eat on the trail." Nell blinked. The slices were even, the wrapping folded cleanly. For a man who spoke little and towered like a mountain wall, he handled the food with surprising precision. "It's more than enough," she said. "Thank you." They sat on opposite sides of the fallen log. The sunlight dappled the forest floor. For the first time since leaving town, Nell let her shoulders ease. Elias ate quietly, eyes scanning the tree line in that instinctive way of men who lived close to danger. After a few minutes, he glanced at her lunch. "You should eat the meat first," he said. "Gives strength for the climb." "Oh." She obeyed without protest. A few more bites passed before she dared speak. "Mr. McKenna, Elias is fine." "Elias, I want to thank you. Back there, in the hotel." She swallowed. "I know you didn't choose me because I look like a proper cook." He studied her for a long second. "I chose you because you looked like someone who's worked hard her whole life. Harder than most." His gaze was steady. "And because cruelty should never be the price of a job." Nell looked down at her hands, her vision shimmering. No one had ever spoken of her labor as if it were worth noticing. He stood, dusted off his gloves. "Finish eating. We still have steep ground ahead." She finished quickly, wanting not to slow him. But when she stood, her foot slipped on loose gravel. She pitched forward with a small gasp. Elias caught her by the forearm before she hit the ground. His grip was firm, steady, and the warmth of his hand spread through her like a sudden fire. "You okay?" "Yes, my shoe slipped." He didn't lecture her, didn't fuss. He simply waited until she found her balance, then guided her back to the mare. The next hour of climbing was tougher. The path narrowed until the horses had to walk single file along a ridge with sheer drop on one side. Nell leaned in close to the mare, heart hammering, trying not to look down. Elias glanced back. "Keep your eyes on the rocks by the horse's ears, not the edge." She obeyed. Her breath steadied. When the trail widened again, she let out a shaky sigh. Elias slowed until they rode side by side. "You did well," he said. She almost laughed. "I thought I might faint." "But you didn't." He looked ahead, voice calm as ever. "Most folks who come up this way cry before the first ridge." Nell blinked. "Did you?" "Once." "When?" "The first time I came up here alone. I was 12. Nell couldn't help it. She smiled. It felt like the first real smile in days. By late afternoon, clouds gathered like gray wool above the peaks. A faint chill crept into the air. "We'll camp soon," Elias said. "Don't want to ride through the storm." Nell tensed. "Camp? Out here?" "It's safe and warm. I'll see to that." They found shelter beneath a natural overhang of rock. Elias unpacked with the smooth rhythm of a practiced man. Firewood, bedrolls, waterproof canvas. Nell tried to help, but he stopped her with a shake of his head. "You've done enough for one day. Sit by the fire." She obeyed reluctantly, watching him strike flint against steel. Sparks caught on the dried moss he'd gathered, and soon a crackling flame lit the cave-like space. Elias ladled broth from a tin pot into 2 wooden cups. "It's simple, but it'll warm you." Steam rose into Nell's face. The broth smelled of onions, herbs, and something smoky. When she tasted it, the warmth slid all the way to her stomach, then radiated outward. "This is good," she whispered. "Glad." He didn't stare at her, didn't hover, but he sat close enough that she felt his presence like an anchor in the long, wild night. Above them, the storm broke softly, first a whisper of rain, then a steady drumming. The wind moaned through the pines, but the fire's glow made a small world of safety around them. Nell looked at Elias, silhouetted against the orange light, and felt a strange certainty bloom in her chest. Maybe she had not been chosen as a joke. Maybe she had been chosen because, somewhere deep inside, he recognized someone like himself, lonely, hard-working, bruised by the world, but not broken. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't ask for what. He simply nodded, eyes softening for the briefest moment. Dawn came pale and cool, the storm clouds drifting away like tired ghosts. Nell woke to the soft crackle of rekindled fire and the scent of pine resin warming on the flames. When she blinked fully awake, she found Elias already on his feet, packing the bedrolls with quiet efficiency. "You slept well," he said without looking over. "I hope I didn't snore?" "You did." A pause, but only a little. Something in his tone, dry, almost playful, made her flush. No man had ever joked with her without cruelty under the words. She hugged her shawl tighter and helped him fold the canvas. He didn't stop her this time. Once the horses were saddled, they climbed again. The sun broke over the mountain peaks in thin gold ribbons, cutting into the valleys with clean, sharp light. The air was crisp enough to sting her lungs. "We're close," Elias said. "About an hour more." The trail wound through tight stands of fir and spruce, then opened suddenly into a high meadow. Below them, the world sprawled in endless layers. Green slopes, granite cliffs, a sparkling river thinning into the horizon. Nestled on the far side of the meadow, against a backdrop of towering pines, stood his cabin. Nell drew a breath. It was enormous. 2 stories of solid logs, expertly notched and fitted. Smoke drifted from a wide stone chimney. A barn and smokehouse sat to one side, a chicken coop and fenced garden on the other. The place wasn't rustic. It was established, thriving, almost proud. Elias glanced at her. "It's plain, but it keeps warm." Plain? To her, it looked like something carved straight out of a pioneer dream. The moment they dismounted, a dog bounded from behind the barn, an enormous black and tan shepherd with a plumed tail. "Easy, Thor," Elias murmured. The dog halted a few steps from Nell, sniffed, then wagged his tail and bumped his head against her hip with surprising gentleness. "He likes you," Elias observed. Nell stared. "Animals usually prefer smaller people. Thor prefers kind people." Her heart fluttered unexpectedly. Inside, the cabin was warm from a banked fire. The main room was large and welcoming. A wood stove in the corner, shelves lined with jars of herbs and dried beans, a long pine table polished by use, and braided rugs softening the floorboards. The upstairs loft was closed off by a railing, beyond which she glimpsed a tidy bed and a small writing desk. Elias set her trunk near the staircase. "Your room is through that door." Her room? Not a cot in the corner, not a shared basement like in Chicago. A real room, with a door she could close. She stepped inside and gasped quietly. A modest bed with a thick quilt, a washstand, a small window looking out to the pines. It wasn't extravagant, but it was hers. For once, she wouldn't be sleeping in the shadow of other people's belongings. When she stepped back into the main room, Elias was already in the kitchen alcove, setting down a tin of coffee beans. "If you need anything, tell me." Nell looked around at the clean counters, the orderly shelves, the well-used cast-iron pans hanging above the stove. It was the first kitchen she'd seen in years that felt respected, a place where meals weren't rushed or resented. "I can work with this," she said softly. Elias nodded. "Good." She unpacked slowly, arranging her knives on a small shelf, her spices near the stove. The familiar ritual steadied her. Elias left her alone, stepping outside to chop wood. Each rhythmic swing of his axe echoed through the cabin walls. By noon, she had made her first meal, potato stew thickened with cream, skillet cornbread, and sliced apples sautéed with cinnamon. She carried 2 bowls to the porch, unsure where he preferred to eat. Elias stopped mid-swing when he smelled the stew. His eyes settled on the bowls. "You didn't have to cook today." "I wanted to." He washed his hands in the pump basin, then sat beside her. Thor settled at their feet. Elias took a bite, then another. The silence stretched until Nell's nerves trembled. He set his spoon down. "This is the best meal I've eaten since my mother passed." She blinked. "Truly?" He nodded once, firm and sincere. "You cook with care. That's rare." Nell looked down, blinking hard. She had spent years hiding behind her work, letting food speak when her body was judged. Hearing someone value the work itself, it felt like a blessing spoken aloud. Over the next days, a pattern formed. Every morning, Nell woke before dawn. She lit the stove, ground coffee, sliced onions for the day's stew, kneaded dough for the evening's bread. As she worked, the cabin slowly filled with warmth and the hum of early life, wood crackling, water boiling, dog nails tapping lightly on the floorboards. Elias emerged from his room with his shirt half-buttoned, hair damp from the wash basin. He always paused at the kitchen threshold, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Morning." "Morning, Elias." Then he would take his coffee outside and check the traps, mend fence posts, or haul logs from the forest. He rarely spoke at length, but his actions were steady and full of intention. He made a second woodshed just so she'd never have to step into snowdrifts for firewood. He repaired the kitchen door so it wouldn't scrape the floor. He carved her a spoon from juniper wood when he noticed her favorite ladle was cracked. Small kindnesses offered without fanfare. In turn, Nell began leaving little things for him, a tin of fresh biscuits cooling on the table, his coffee sweetened with a touch of molasses when he looked especially tired, a clean towel folded on the washstand, hot soup waiting when he returned soaked from a sudden rain. She didn't think he noticed, but he did. One evening, after supper, he lingered near the stove while she washed dishes. The glow from the lamp softened his features, made the scar along his jaw look less fierce, more human. "You don't have to do all this," he said. She smiled faintly. "It's my job." "It's more than that. You make the house feel lived in." Nell rinsed her hands, unsure what to say. No one had ever accused her of making a place feel like home. Her size had often made people position her near the edges, too big, too noticeable, too much. But here, in this cabin, she didn't feel like too much. She felt necessary. Elias cleared his throat. "Tomorrow, if you want, I can teach you to split kindling." She laughed, a small, warm sound. "I'm hardly the wood-chopping type." His eyes softened. "You could be." The next morning, she tried. She held the axe awkwardly, her grip uncertain. Elias stood behind her, not touching, just guiding her stance with quiet instructions. Loosen your shoulders. Don't fight the weight. Let the axe fall. Use gravity. She swung. The log split on the first try. Oh, she gasped. Elias allowed himself the smallest smile. Told you? That afternoon, she baked a pie and set aside the prettiest slice for him. It was the first time he'd accepted a gesture without hesitation. He ate it, standing beside the stove, eyes half lighted in a rare moment of softness. That night, the wind howled outside, but the cabin glowed warm and golden. Nell sat at the table mending a tear in her apron, while Elias whittled a piece of wood into a small figurine. Thor slept stretched across both their feet. It was the kind of evening that crept into the bones, quiet and steady, promising something she didn't dare name, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The first snow settled early that year, drifting down in soft, steady flakes that coated the forest path in white velvet. Nell pressed her palms to the kitchen window, watching the world transform into a quiet, untouched expanse. She'd never lived in a place where winter came like a whispered blessing instead of a burden dumped on factory roofs. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of roasting chicken, garlic, and rosemary. The wood stove radiated warmth. Thor dozed in front of it, paws twitching as he dreamed. Elias had been gone since before dawn, taking the pack mule to retrieve supplies from a distant trapping site. He'd told her not to worry, that he knew these woods better than his own heartbeat. But as afternoon fell into a blue-gray dusk, worry crept in anyway. She dried her hands on her apron and stoked the fire. Shadows stretched longer across the floorboards. Outside, the sky grew bruised with dusk. The chicken finished roasting, but still Elias did not return. When hoofbeats finally broke through the cold air, Nell hurried to the door. Elias stepped inside, dusted with snow, his coat torn along the sleeve. A thin line of dried blood streaked across the back of his hand. Her breath caught. "Elias, you're hurt!" He shut the door with a careful push and removed his coat. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." He avoided her eyes. "A tree branch, that's all." But it wasn't just the tear in his sleeve. His shoulders were rigid with tension, his jaw tight, and something storm-dark lay behind his eyes. Nell stepped closer. What really happened? Elias hesitated, then exhaled, a long breath fogging in the cold air. Someone was tracking me. Nell's skin prickled. An animal? No. The single word dropped heavy between them. He washed the blood from his hand at the basin. Nell stood behind him, waiting. Finally he said, "3 men. I recognized their tracks from miles back. They were careful, but not careful enough. Who were they?" He dried his hand slowly. "Men from the mining settlement. They've been stealing traps, cutting lines, claiming parts of the ridge that aren't theirs." "Why follow you?" Elias didn't answer at first. When he finally did, the truth was rough. "Because they want this land, and anyone who stands in the way." Nell's breath caught. "Have they come here before?" His jaw tightened. "A few times, asking questions, claiming boundaries. I turned them away." "Did they threaten you?" "Men like that don't threaten with words." A chill traveled down her spine that had nothing to do with the snowstorm outside. She had assumed life on the mountain was shaped only by weather, animals, and long, quiet days. She hadn't imagined this. Men willing to claim what wasn't theirs, men who would follow someone through the forest like wolves. Elias studied her face, his eyes softening. I didn't mean to worry you." "I'm not worried for myself," she whispered. "I'm worried for you." His expression shifted, gentler, almost vulnerable for a breath. Then he cleared his throat and stepped toward the table. They ate supper quietly, but the tension lingered like a ghost seated between them. Elias barely touched his food. He kept glancing at the windows, listening to sounds only he could interpret. Nell finally set her fork down. "Elias, there's something I should tell you." He looked up. Her pulse thudded. She had kept this secret tucked away her whole life, not because it was shameful, though some made it seem so, but because she'd learned long ago that anything unusual in her life could be twisted into a weapon against her. "When I left Chicago," she said slowly, "I didn't come empty-handed, not completely." She reached behind her apron and drew out a small leather pouch tied with a faded blue ribbon. Inside were 6 folded papers, brittle from age, corners soft from being turned over and over again. Elias frowned. "What are those?" "My mother's deed," Nell whispered, "to 40 acres on the outskirts of Chicago." Elias's brows rose. 40 acres? It doesn't sound like much, but the land borders the railroad's expansion route. The company offered to buy it last year. "How much?" She hesitated. $3,000. Elias stilled completely. "That land was my mother's," Nell continued, her voice faint. "She left it to me, but cousins on my father's side claimed it belonged to them. They forged signatures, filed petitions, and when I fought back, they made my life unbearable, mocked my body, mocked my work, called me a greedy, useless woman." She swallowed. "I left because staying meant losing everything, my dignity, my safety. I kept the deed because it's the only part of her I have left." Silence stretched between them, thick with meaning. "Nell," Elias said quietly, "those men today, they weren't following me because of traps." Her blood ran cold. "What?" "Word travels in the frontier, faster than anyone expects. If your cousins filed claims or stirred up enough noise, someone could have caught wind of it here." He tapped the table. "A woman traveling alone with deeds for land worth thousands. Men have killed for far less." The room suddenly felt smaller. The wind outside pressed against the walls with a low, mournful howl. "Elias," she whispered, "are you saying they followed you because of me?" "I'm saying they were looking for something," he replied, voice steady. "And you're the only something new in my life." Thor lifted his head, ears pricked. Elias stood, eyes narrowing toward the door. Nell's heart hammered. "What is it?" Elias held up one finger for silence. Another sound. Snow crunching under heavy boots. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was outside. Nell's hands trembled on the edge of the table. Elias reached for his rifle and spoke in a low, calm voice meant to steady her. "Stay behind me, and no matter what happens, you don't open that door." But Nell, trembling and terrified, stepped forward and whispered, "I'm not letting you face this alone." Elias turned, eyes meeting hers, and for the first time he didn't hide the truth from his expression. Fear not for himself, but fear of losing her. Footsteps halted on the porch. A fist pounded once, slow and ominous, on the cabin door. The knock echoed through the cabin like a warning shot. Thor rose first, a low, rumbling growl rolling through his chest. Nell felt it vibrate through the floorboards beneath her feet. Elias positioned himself between her and the door, rifle steady in both hands, barrel angled downward, but ready in a breath. Another knock, harder this time. "Elias McKenna," a voice called. "Come out. We got business." Nell's breath hitched. There were at least two voices, maybe three. Men who sounded confident enough to climb a mountain in winter, confident enough to come to a man like Elias with shadows in their tone. Elias didn't answer. He lowered his stance slightly, eyes narrowed, reading every whisper of sound from outside, the shifting of boots on wood, the cold rasp of a man's exhale, the faint scrape of metal. Nell touched his arm. "Elias, should we hide? Slip out the back?" "No." His voice was firm, calm. "Snow is deep. Tracks would give us away. Door stays shut, and you stay behind me." The next knock rattled the hinges. "Open up, McKenna. We ain't here for trouble, just want what belongs to us." Elias raised his voice just enough to carry through the thick wood. "State your business." A tense pause. "Looky there," another man said. "Now he wants to talk." "We heard you're sheltering a woman," the first voice continued. "Pretty little thing from Chicago." A cruel chuckle followed. "She's carrying papers that belong to her kin, papers worth money." Nell's blood turned to ice. "They've been real worried back home," the man went on. "Said she ran off with property that ain't hers. We're just here to bring it back." Elias didn't move, didn't breathe. "She's not property." "That's your opinion," the man outside sneered. "Law says something else, and unless you want trouble, you'll hand her over nice and quiet." Nell clutched Elias's sleeve. "Don't go out there, please." He didn't look back at her. His focus stayed trained on the door, but his voice softened just a fraction. "I'm not giving you up, not to them, not to anyone." The men outside must have heard the murmur because a jeering voice cut in. "She inside, then? The fat one? Should have known you'd hide her. Heard she'd fetch a price if someone wants a woman who eats more than she cooks." Thor barked, sharp, dangerous. Nell flinched. Her chest knotted with shame and fury, the old familiar ache of being reduced to a body before a name, a weight before a worth. But before the ache could swallow her, Elias stepped closer to the door, voice like tempered steel. "You talk about her again," he said, "and I'll come out there, snowstorm or not." Another voice scoffed. "Big words from a mountain hermit." Elias inhaled slowly, then spoke with a clarity that made even Nell's heartbeat pause. "You climbed my ridge. You knocked on my door. That means you know exactly what kind of man I am." Silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "You want to test the boundaries of my land?" Elias murmured. "Fine, but understand something." He lifted the rifle, quietly, deliberately, so the barrel pointed straight at the door. "You won't make it back down the mountain." Nell's pulse thundered. She had never seen him like this, controlled, disciplined, dangerous in a way that wasn't bluster, but truth. A man shaped by wilderness, loss, and the unyielding instinct to protect what mattered. A few muttered curses drifted from the porch. Then a metallic click. Nell stiffened. "They have guns." Elias stayed steady. "So do I." For a long, terrible moment, the world narrowed to the crackle of the fire and the pounding of her pulse. Then the first voice said, "Ain't worth it. Snow's getting deep. We'll come back when the storm clears." Bootsteps crunched away. Murmured arguments faded into the dark. Hoofbeats drifted into the trees, swallowed by the wind. Thor stayed rigid until the last echo died, then exhaled in a low whine. Nell sagged against the table, trembling. "Elias, they'll be back." He locked the door, lowered the rifle, and finally turned to her. His expression had softened, but the protective fire still flickered behind his eyes. "I know. What will we do?" He closed the distance between them, slowly, as if approaching a frightened deer, and rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It was warm, solid, grounding. "We'll face it," he said quietly. "Together." Her breath caught. "Together," she echoed. Outside, the storm thickened, swirling snow across the cabin windows like a curtain drawn between them and the dangers waiting beyond the ridge. Inside, the warmth of the fire wrapped around them both, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Nell felt something settle deep in her chest. Not fear, not shame. Resolve. The storm raged through the night, snow piling high against the logs, wind wailing through the pines like a warning. But inside the cabin, a soft golden glow held the darkness at bay. Nell set another log onto the fire and adjusted the kettle so the steam wouldn't rattle the lid. Small, careful motions, anything to keep her hands from trembling. Elias finished bolting the shutters and returned to the hearth. He removed his gloves slowly, flexing his fingers as if measuring the weight of what had just happened. "They won't try climbing back up tonight," he said. "Not in this weather." Nell nodded, but her voice came out small. "What if they wait? What if they bring more men?" "Then I'll be ready." Elias paused. "We'll be ready." Nell lowered herself into the chair opposite him, the fire warming one side of her face. "I don't understand. Why would they come all this way? Why risk the snow, the climb?" Elias studied her before answering. "Some men can't stand the idea of a woman owning anything of value, especially a woman they think they can intimidate." His voice grew quieter. "Especially a woman they think has no one to protect her." Nell looked down at her lap. The memory of those fists pounding on the door, the jeers about her body, the accusation that she was property, it all pressed against her ribs like a band tightening. "Elias," she said softly, "I don't want you to be hurt because of me." He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. The firelight carved warm gold across his cheekbones, softened the scar that ran along his jaw. "Hurt because of you?" he repeated. "Nell, you didn't bring danger here. Danger has walked these mountains for years. I've faced it before." His gaze steadied, quiet and unwavering. "What you brought here is something I haven't had in a long time." She blinked. "What's that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the kitchen, toward the table she polished every morning, the bread rising on the counter, the pot of stew simmering gently on the stove. Then he looked back at her. "Life," he said simply. Nell's breath caught in her throat. "Elias." "You make the cabin feel like more than walls," he continued. "You make it warm even when the fire burns low." His voice grew rougher, more vulnerable. "You make me remember what it was like before I lost everything." The wind moaned against the shutters. Thor shifted closer to the fire, curling near Nell's feet. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Elias's voice dropped to a near whisper. "This cabin, it can be your home, if you want it to be." Nell stared at him, heart pounding. She had never been offered a home, not truly, not one that wasn't rented by the week or shared with strangers or conditional on someone else's cruelty. "You're safe here," Elias said, "as long as you want to stay." Her eyes burned. No one had ever said those words to her, not with truth behind them, not with a kind of quiet, steady devotion that made her feel seen, fully, wholly, without the mockery that had followed her all her life. She swallowed hard. Elias, I don't know what will happen with the men from town, or with the deed, or with my family. I know, he said, but whatever comes, we'll face it one step at a time. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just the mountain man who defended her, not just the man with a rifle steady against danger, but someone who had opened his door and his life without asking for anything in return. Snow continued to fall outside, but in the cabin the air felt warm, almost tender. Nell exhaled shakily. Do you think love can grow in a place like this, with trouble waiting on the other side of the trees? Elias held her gaze, firelight flickering between them. That depends, he murmured. Is the trouble strong enough to break what's beginning here? Nell couldn't answer. Not yet. The fire cracked softly, sending sparks upward like small, bright questions rising into the air, unanswered, hovering, waiting. No matter where you're hearing this story from, an apartment in the city, a quiet room at night, a long highway drive, or a cold winter morning, thank you for walking these mountain paths with Nell and Elias. Stories like this remind us that even across distance and different lives, we're all connected by the same hopes, safety, kindness, a place to belong, and someone who sees our worth before the world ever does. If you're listening right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this from? And if you still believe love can bloom even in the harshest places, stay close. The next story is already waiting for you.